horrific week. That's Monica Palmer on the other end of our line. Monica, good morning, and thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I
know your call the other day from the president had to be a little more enjoyable than talking with us, but we thank you for coming on at any rate. That had to be, after all you went through this week, tell me your reaction when the president called. I mean, were you in one of those you got to be kidding me moments?
That's exactly what I said. The message was, the president's going to be calling you in a moment, and I went, you're kidding me, right? It was in an evening that was filled with stress and a lot of emotion and adrenaline. It was very heartfelt to hear the president thank me for my service on the board and to check in to make sure that I was safe.
Yeah. Now, how many years have you been on the board,
Monica? About 2.
About 2 now, and you and William Hartman are the 2 Republicans on the board. There are 2 Democrats as well, led by the Vice Chair, Jonathan Kinloch, who was on with us yesterday. And I got to tell you, he never mentioned racism during our conversation.
Well, that's interesting because after I made the no vote on the certification, because there were a large number of precincts and absentee counting boards that were out of balance, unexplained, and the unexplained piece is what needs to be addressed by the canvass in order to certify. In his statement, he called me a racist directly after the no vote.
Had you had any disagreements with him in the past that led to similar comments?
No, we've actually had a pretty good working relationship. After the primary election, the previous election, Vice Chair Kinloch and I had a joint resolution going to the state board of canvassers and the Department of Elections, asking for an investigation of the city of Detroit's election process because it was so out of balance, unexplained, 76%, if I remember correctly. There was bipartisan support to fix the problem during the last election. Why now are we okay with the way it turned out when the percentages are just as bad?
That's a good question. And, if this has been an issue, we know it has in Wayne County for a long time, quite frankly, hasn't it, Monica?
Like I said, I've only been on the board for 2 years. I'm relatively new to this side of the state, but my understanding is, yes, this is kind of status quo for Wayne County. But just because it's happened for a long time doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean that it should continue to happen.
Yeah, Chris Alberta, I know one thing. If this happens in the private sector, your business is going right down the drain, isn't it?
No, you're probably either going to jail or faced with a fine the size of Mississippi. I find that a little shocking that the relationship over the last few years working with Mr. Kinloch was cordial and seemed to be mutually respectful, but then he didn't come to your aid when all those insults were being hurled. Naturally, everyone has their own bias, and that's why you have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. But good grief, if that's the mud that's going to be slung, something's wrong with the.
The lawsuits here in Michigan have been pretty much dropped now by the Trump administration and Monica Palmer, or by the Trump campaign, I should say, not the administration. Monica Palmer, as you look at that as a Republican, are you heartened by that? Do you believe that the challenge ought to end now? And as a Republican, do you believe the president? Are you going to tell him that he ought to concede the election to Joe Biden?
I'm staying out of that arena right now. My focus has been on Wayne County. I am a Republican at heart, and I do support President Trump, but that is separate from my duties as a canvasser. And my focus has been on how do we get the precincts to be balanced. If they're not balanced, there should be a reconciliation based on commentary. If you don't have answers of why things don't tie out, it's a huge problem. They're not recountable. So whatever madness is going on outside of Wayne County and lawsuits and commentary, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that if there is a recount, that those precincts, those voters can go back to that recount and they know their votes were counted properly and accounted for.
Let's see if Chris Alberta's got a question for you as well. Chris?
Well, Frank and Monica, having read that whole affidavit, the thing that stuck out to me the most was at some point, you were told that your discretion, in quotes, your discretion, was not supposed to be used in terms of helping make a decision on whether or not these were legitimate or whether it was balanced. And I find that odd. I mean, if your discretion isn't necessary, why are you there in the first place? What did they expect from you to begin with?
I agree 100% with you. If I don't have a choice of whether to certify or not, what is the purpose of having a board?
Right. Absolutely.
And I want to follow up with one more piece of information. As a board, we're expected to decide, are we going to sign that we're certifying these numbers? We were never provided with a written executive summary to tell us which precincts in Wayne County were in or out of balance. I asked for it before the meeting, and I was given a verbal report instead.
Just so we all understand, what does that mean, in balance?
So the number of voters in the poll book, the number of ballots in the poll book matches the number that were totaled on election night. So if you issue 100 ballots, you've got 100 counted for in the total on election night. Understand, it may be out of balance if there's a spoiled ballot. That's normal, but there's an explanation in the poll book for it. What we find in Detroit is the number of ballots issued does not match the number of ballots counted, and there's no explanation why.
How much is the difference? How many votes?
It varies from precinct to precinct, and not having a written report of that before the vote is a problem. You can't analyze it.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like this is one or two votes. My point, Monica, is it sounds like this is, you're suggesting this is pretty widespread and not just an isolated miscount somewhere.
I asked staff for the largest discrepancy, and in one absentee counting board, it was 34 votes.
All right.
I encourage you to reach out to other counties across the state and find out what their out of balance unexplained numbers are. I think you'll find the difference.
Final question: What did the president have to say? If you can let us in on the phone call a little bit, if you don't mind.
He just wanted to make sure that I was safe. He'd heard about the threats and thanked me for my service.
Well, we thank you for your service too, and thank you for coming on the show this morning, Monica. Really appreciate it. Best of luck to you.
Thanks for having me.
Be well. Chris Alberta, that's a thankless position that she holds, is it not? Yeah, Chris said yes. That's
I tell you what, I mean, I imagine her emotions went up and down the flagpole.
I'd say, okay, it's a two-putt. If you held up three, that means it's a three-putt and yes. So I took that as a yes.
Yeah, that's a job I don't want. That's a job I don't want right there.
Oh, you couldn't pay me enough to do that job, I guarantee you. And I'll tell you the other thing, though, is if somebody got in a room with me and called me a racist, I think it would be more than a verbal exchange. So that's absolutely another point. That's another point for another day. At any rate, we'll continue. Chris Alberta is with us here on the Frank Beckman Show this morning. We'll have some of your phone calls coming up. A very special meeting with State Senator Jim Runstad.